start, thank you so much for doing this and welcome to Washington, D.C. I know you've had a busy day. And I know this is a very personal movie for both of you, and I'd love to hear sort of how you came to it. And I'm also curious, since this is both, you know, the movie is somewhat different from other work that both of you have done, you know, how you came from other work that you've done to a better life.
Well, I mean, I'll start because actually I think Demián has shown, obviously as an actor he gets to do different roles, but there is a political strain through quite a lot of the stuff that he does. Like on Weitz, you know, he's the mayor of Tijuana, yes? And so that's still connected with border issues, and he played Fidel. Me, I've never made a political film in my life, and in many ways, you know, although I kind of always leaned, red, which one is red? Which one is Democrat? Red, blue? I always get it mixed up. Blue.
Left, blue.
But shouldn't the red be left? Really?
No.
Because
makes a lot of
That's a
makes all the sense in the world.
Okay, never mind.
That's a messaging problem.
It raised that question.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Ed. I've always leaned blue, personally, but this film was really the first one that got me politically involved, and it was almost kind of post facto. It was, you know, it was just a great script, and it was an excuse to learn Spanish. I was the first part of the first generation of my family not to speak Spanish. My grandma was Spanish, and I had lived in LA for 20 years, and I knew that there was another part of Los Angeles, East Los Angeles, that we were supposed to be scared of, and that, you know, you didn't go to except to go to this one good fish restaurant, but you had to be very careful when you left your car. Just nonsense like that, which you learn is not the truth. In fact, LA is 50% Spanish practically, and I ended up not only learning more about my, you know, my culture, my city, also my country, and the way that we can become so easily divided. LA is a horizontal city. America is a horizontal country, and we can grow distant from one another, and find it too easy not to get to know one another, and not to appreciate the things that are brought to our table literally by people who are working behind the scenes. These are the undocumented 11 million people in our country. So it's almost been, it's really been an experience of politicization to make this film. And I'll leave it to Demián. I've been talking enough.
Well, I'd be curious too about your work in telenovelas. Chris mentioned some political strains in your work. I'd love to hear you talk about that continuum if you think there is one.
I don't go into TV a lot unless it's, you know, things like the ones we did. Nada personal and demasiado corazón. I used to play good cop. How's that? How about that in Mexico? So this guy was this type of tough, you know, cop that was willing to do anything in order to get the job done without getting any extra money from nobody. And that was something weird for TV in Mexico. That was, you know, 12 years ago. And then I did Zapata, the icon of the Mexican Revolution. I played Miguel Hidalgo, the father of Mexico, Free Mexico, the father of Mexican independence. And then I played El Comandante Uno, Rosenberg Pavon, in a Colombian film about the M19 who took the Dominican embassy in Bogota about some years ago. And then I played Fidel Castro, and then I've been linked to many political stories, and I think the richest of them all is this one, because even though it's not a political statement, it's not a political film, we talk about this crucial issue that's going on in every one's table, in every political agenda, at least in their minds, right? Because no one's really coming up finally with a decent immigration reform. So what drew me to this project was how strong the script is, how well written it is. You have to think about this. We actors, we read a lot of scripts every year. I read scripts from everywhere, in Spanish, from Spain, from Mexico, from in English, and it's really difficult to find a piece of material so well written. Mm-hmm. And then any actor is always looking for powerful characters. We're all looking for our Hamlets and King Lears and stuff and all that. And Carlos Galindo has that dimension. So that alone was enough for me to say, please, yes, right? But then it happened to be directed by Chris Weitz. And so that's pretty much the key for you to say yes or no, because I sometimes say no because I don't trust or like the director or the cast or many other key points. And at this particular project, everything was in place, and I knew, being such a complex character, I needed a really well educated eye to take care of me and to be able to take me there, right?
Absolutely.
So I was covered. And then there's this big plus that has to do with the actual story.
Yeah.
It was an honor for me, and a big responsibility to give Carlos Galindo a voice, because it's the voice of 11 million undocumented workers. And that was really important for me as an Angelino, and and as an immigrant, and because I talk to them every day. So all that together was a big yes.
Well, one thing you mentioned is in a number of your other sort of political roles, you played people who have had a lot of power. And was it an interesting transition to play someone who has very little power, either politically, he has very little power to even access the bureaucracies that could work on his behalf? Was there anything that you took from playing these powerful men that you brought to Carlos?
Interesting, because they're really, really far away from each other. But I think that in many ways, Carlos' power relies in the fact that he doesn't have too many choices or too many chances to screw it up. So he needs to be clear, and he needs to succeed every time he makes a decision.
There's a power in desperation.
And there's a power in desperation, but there's a power within yourself when you're alone, and when you don't have anywhere else to turn or look to or go. And the brutal power of the love of a father for his son, that makes all the difference. Anybody that's a father or a mother knows that there's nothing you cannot do for your children. And that's exactly what happens to Carlos Galindo. And that for me is as strong as wanting the best for your people, if you talk about some of the leaders that I played before.
I was particularly struck by two moments in the film. One, when Carlos and Luis are on the bus and they see the protest in the background. Luis asks what's happening, and his father says nothing. And then the second moment when Carlos meets with the lawyer, who seemed to me at least to be a sort of well-intentioned but not particularly helpful white dude. And I was curious about sort of what you thought the film's political perspective was, because those two moments aren't particularly hopeful about the prospect of reform or of working through the existing system.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the film is not overtly political, because really every detail in it was something that we wanted to get right from the point of view of what someone would actually do in a given situation. So there's very little symbolism in terms of the behavior of the characters. And so Carlos says that there's nothing to say about this demonstration because at that moment he has other things on his mind, and he doesn't have the luxury of politics, nor really do undocumented workers in this country. That's why you're not hearing too many responses to what Republican presidential candidates are saying to these slanders and defamations of character. In terms of what the pro bono lawyer in that case could do for an undocumented immigrant, I had spoken to pro bono lawyers, and in some cases, and actually went to see an ICE detention facility because I'd been signed on by a pro bono lawyer as a friend of one of her clients. She happened to win her case, but it's very rare. And the reason that it's very rare is that the laws are very bad. These are not good laws. And so while the administration continues to enforce them, as is its job, I think nobody on either side of the political spectrum actually thinks that things are hunky-dory in terms of what's on the books. And there's just a disagreement as to how we're going to handle that. So in that regard, it is not very hopeful about the present situation. I think it's hard to be hopeful about any future that continues based upon this present continuing infinitely. What I think it is hopeful about, and where Carlos does have power, is that he represents the fact that these laws and the walls and even the desert, they're not going to stop people.
Right.
And they're not going to stop people from rejoining their families. They're not going to stop people from sending money back home when there's no employment back home and when there's practically a civil war going on back home. So what we might think of in terms of solutions to the problem would be, how do we change the situation in the South, not just how do we kick everybody back over there, because people being arrested crossing the border have been arrested 4 or 5 times already.
Yeah.
So this is just being honest about the case.
No, I don't know if either of you have seen The Help, which posits both that the system can work and that kindly white girls can save people of color, which I actually found more depressing than A Better Life.
This movie is about The Help. For all that movie presents a very important moment in history, it is a sort of the white gaze, as it were, to use a kind of semiotic deconstructionist term. And this was a movie. A Better Life was a movie in which there was no white person who was going to come along and save the day. It's Carlos and his son against the world, really.
Well, I also thought there was an interesting moment, sort of complicity, in the tree climbing scene at the beginning, where Carlos's employer sort of makes a gesture at knowing whether they're licensed and bonded and whether Carlos is going to be okay if he falls out of a tree on her property. And what she wants is to be told yes. She doesn't really want to know the answer. Mm-hmm. And I thought it was sort of an interesting moment of, complicity for white Americans who like cheap labor but aren't particularly interested in any responsibility for the people who perform it.
Right. Well, this is why Mitt Romney got caught out for employing an illegal. It was a perfect example on a smaller scale of how big businesses use middlemen as subcontractors to divest themselves of the responsibility for the exploitation of people who are easily exploitable. Mitt Romney said, I never hired an illegal. Well, he hired a company that hired undocumented immigrants. The problem with that is that it perpetuates this exploitation. And so I think people like me who want to see a comprehensive immigration reform, one of the reasons is that the 11 million people who are doing work that is really necessary in this country are easily exploitable because they're afraid. And that is bad for everybody. It's bad for them. It's bad for low-wage workers because it lowers the wage base across the board. It lowers the tax base. And it's really to the advantage of the Walmarts of the world. And people think that the circle of the 11 million undocumented and the circle of the people who've lost their jobs in the subprime crisis or whose jobs are under threat overlap, but they really don't. They really don't. The undocumented are doing jobs that we are no longer physically, mentally, and spiritually able to do, like picking fruit in Georgia. These states are laboratory cases of why these very aggressive anti-immigration laws are to the detriment of the economy.
Mm-hmm. I'd be curious about, the personal impact making the film for you and what the response has been, in Washington and elsewhere
Mm-hmm.
to the political message that I think you articulated very effectively.
Well, we had a trip to Capitol Hill today to meet Senator Durbin, who's been, a paladin for the cause of immigrants in this country. And we met with Cecilia Munoz and her colleagues at the White House. And we spoke about this problem of the broken system of immigration. And part of the problem is an obstructionism on the part of Republican congressmen, both representatives and senators, who formerly were in favor of immigration reform, who saw the sense of it, but who have switched sides, largely in part because of a blowback against President Obama's election. Now, as it happened, when we were in the Senate, we went to the Senate gallery, and there speaking was John McCain, a man who changed his stance 180 degrees on immigration rights. And I can only attribute this to a desire to throw practicality under the bus so long as it will produce a Republican presidential victory. So, it reinforces my belief that a second Obama administration is the way forward. That having been said, I don't think that they can rest on any laurels, because there are, of course, many people in the Hispanic community who feel that they were promised many things and haven't received them yet. My ideal situation would be that in a second term these promises would be delivered upon. But that's yet to be seen.
What do you think it's going to take to get through to Americans, both about how they treat their neighbors who are immigrants, and to get through to average Americans the sense that Mexico is our neighbor, it's not going anywhere, we have to treat the country as if, they were actual physical neighbors in our neighborhoods? I mean, I don't know, it's not the clearest question in the world.
No, I think, I believe in the power of movies. I believe in the power that a film has to make a great impact into people's minds and hearts. And that's what this film's been doing. People get really moved by it. But also, there's all this other group of spectators that aren't Hispanic and that are getting the point and have been moved by it, and their minds have been opened, and they have understood that this is not a political problem, it is a human problem, and you have to deal with it respecting human rights. That is exactly what this country has been based on. Also, I think it's important to educate everyone, because politicians lie constantly in order to get away with whatever they need. People need to go out and find the truth, find out about the real situation and how everything's working. Because when ignorance prevails, then comes fear and then hate. And that's, for me, the true risk, because all those 11 million people are here, they exist, they all have a family, they all have a house, they all pay taxes. And they don't really get anything in return. They have their children here, a lot of them, already American citizens. And what all this is creating is a separation of the families. And that's not human anywhere in the world, especially not in this country. It shouldn't be allowed to happen. So there are a lot of things that a film can do, but you need to do your own homework. You as an American citizen, as someone that before listening to your politicians and hating others because they are taking your job, you should really get the facts and get informed, because that's really far away from the truth.
One of the things I thought was interesting and compelling about the movie is that it doesn't shy away from the idea that in exchange for a better life there are costs. And I thought the question of the song that Carlos sang to Luis when he was little, that he sort of resists remembering that scene at the rodeo where he says, that he hates this kind of music, and his father says, well, what do you like? He said, anything other than this is very funny. But it also suggests that there are, real costs in terms of cultural assimilation. And, I wonder, the movie is called A Better Life, but is a better life an unambiguously good thing? Are there costs to be paid?
Yeah.
Both by sort of first and second, subsequent generations of immigrants.
Well, I mean, I feel the title is meant to be flexible in that regard, which is to say, that's the phrase that people always use when they talk about, why their ancestors came to this country. But in so doing, they've often lost their birthright, essentially. There's a sequence at a Mexican rodeo, which actually exists. It's in Pico Rivera, outside of Los Angeles. And there are some people who've managed, through great effort, to maintain the culture of northern Mexico, the kind of Mexican cowboy culture. But for many Mexican Americans, finding a better life here has often meant submitting to the dominant culture and giving up on their heritage. I think that as Hispanic Americans kind of move ahead economically, that becomes less of a problem. The real problem is when someone like Luis, the character in the movie, sees the dominant culture in front of him on TV and can't reach it, realizes he's never going to get there. In his school, there is no respect for that culture. And his father, who represents that culture, can clearly not deliver on what the television promises him. And so Luis refuses often to speak Spanish to his father. And he's in a state of cultural denial. He submits to the dominant culture, but he resents it at the same time. And it's really, the film in a way is a journey back to each one discovering what the other has to offer. Now, we were in Morelia for the film festival, for the Mexican opening of the film, and Mexico is a great and beautiful country with tremendous resources. And so it would be a nice thing if the only Mexicans who wanted to visit America were doing so out of a sense of adventure and interest in this culture to the north. The problem is that for a number of reasons, some of which have been caused by Americans, like NAFTA flooding the Mexican market with American subsidized corn, like the number of gun shops on the border. I think it's actually a majority of American gun shops. The appetite for cocaine in this country. We have contributed to a situation in which the political violence and the economic corruption that can be endemic down there forces people northwards. But then we don't acknowledge what's going on down there. We don't have a holistic notion of this at all, and we're in tremendous denial, like the lady in the garden who doesn't really want to know what's going on. I think that's true of a lot of us, and I think it was true of me before I made this film too. You sort of think, well, I pay the gardener well, so everything is okay.
I'm doing
Really.
the right thing. There isn't a system that I'm a part of that's a problem.
Yeah, I'm nice to this guy, and everything's cool. But the reason that this film was made in the first place was that 25 years ago, and I wasn't involved at the time, but Paul Witt, who was the producer of Three Kings and producer of Dead Poets Society, had a friend whose gardener's truck was stolen. And the friend said, well, we'll just go to the police and get it back. And the gardener said, you don't understand, we can't go to the police. And he realized that he knew nothing about this man. He knew nothing about the pressures and the fear that he lived under. And it's an example of how the undocumented in this country, although they are often, let's say someone has a fake social security number, they're paying withholding taxes, they're paying into the tax base, but they are not utilizing social services because they're afraid of being turned in. Up until recently, it would have been pretty easy to solve, actually. If somebody stole a truck from an undocumented immigrant, you just go to the cops, because Article 40 said that the cops couldn't give the ICE your information, but with the secure communities, that's all turned 180 again. So these are people who are from traditional societies in a country down south, whether it be Mexico, Guatemala, El Salvador, where the rule of law is not everything that it ought to be honest about it. And so they don't trust the police, even if the police are trustworthy. And one of the things we try to establish in this movie is that there are no villains. The police are not the bad guys. ICE are not the bad guys. They are enforcing laws. The law is the problem, not the people.
I mean, Americans, I think, both try to shut their eyes to the actual conditions that undocumented immigrants live under, but as both of you have said, we don't actually know that much about conditions in Mexico. And I don't know if either of you have seen Miss Bala, but I think the two movies are sort of perfect
I haven't seen
companion
it.
pieces. Have you seen it?
Yeah.
I'd be curious to know what you think about it and sort of how it interacts with some of the messages
I think
that are-
art in general exists
Yeah.
to put on paper or on a painting or on a film or a novel, whatever particular time that you're living in. And that's exactly what's happening now. Everything that you see on screen in Mexico or here pretty much are stories that we take from reality. And then we as artists do that and leave it there for future generations to come, right? So that particular film will talk about that particular time in Mexico. And we hope that that's going to be part of the past pretty soon.
Because like A Better Life, it's also based on a true story about the kidnapping of Bichir.
Not only that, whoever has seen the film always tells you, wow, that looks so real. It is so real. And that's exactly the first thing I thought when I read the script. I thought, wow, this is a real thing. This is exactly the way it is. And you need some talent to be able to do that. Miss Bala is a good film. It's a really good film. Talking about a really, really raw situation that is happening in Mexico. But it's only a small part of it. If we think about how many Mexicans there are in Mexico, 110 million. So a lot of people, when they ask me, so if I go to Mexico, I'm gonna get kidnapped, and there's gonna be fire going on everywhere I go. And so that's another example of misunderstanding something or living in denial or under a big amount of ignorance. You have to separate things. Miss Bala, it's not Mexico. It's only a small part of it. And I don't think there's a connection with A Better Life. I think the magic with A Better Life is that it relies on the fact that it's a universal theme. Tema.
Mm-hmm.
It's a universal issue. And you can watch this film in Spain, anywhere in Africa, anywhere in South America, and understand exactly what's going on, because it's the love of a father for his son and his willingness to do anything to overcome any obstacles to give his son a better life. And speaking as such, I think it's about time that we give these people a better life, since they've been making our lives a lot better. Always, every day. There isn't a single activity in our lives in this country that an undocumented worker is not involved in many, many ways. And so I'm really proud of being an artist, because I can do that. I can tell particular stories in our times. And this film, I think, if we are able finally to take it all the way to the White House, for example, to be watched by the president and his wife and as many people as possible, then we would be achieving something else other than just, oh, what a nice film we made. That's the only way I see art. I can understand my work if it's good for others.
Well, as a nerdy culture critic who writes all about the impact of culture on politics, you and I are clearly on the same page.
I want to add, though, that this is as well as the fact that Demián's performances is one of the most powerful in a movie this year, I think. SAG and the Academy have the opportunity to vote not just for an actor, but for a role, and not just for a role, but for a human being, for 11 million human beings. All things being equal, that's something that they can do with the stroke of a pen. That's something really exciting for me.
Well, it looks like the buzz has been great. I know.
It has been great, and
people have been writing very buzzy, enthusiastic.
Yes, we like buzzy things. We like buzzy things very much. But this is my dream, and Demián can't say it because he's modest, but I can.
I'm already happy.
Well, thank you both so much.
Thank you.
For what you did on